To have a few minutes before we'll get started and either settle in your practice or take the time to, in your own way, connect with the community. Just that we have to make that conscious effort to feel like we're together in this virtual space. It's not as easy as it is when we're sitting in the room together. As a lot of you know, because you've been practicing for a while, safety is such an important ingredient in life and spiritual life. And it really matters what we pay attention to. And I could be sitting here, which is easy in the Zoom context for me, and I'm guessing for many of us. I can be sitting here, and by what I'm paying attention to, I can be amplifying, cultivating the sense of alienation, and I'm all alone in this house, and nobody loves me, or just the worlds we construct. Or I can be connecting with the faces that I recognize and curious about the names and faces I don't recognize, and grateful that this Dharma, excuse me, this Dharma community can come together on Tuesday evenings like we do. And that's not a bad way to begin. Just cultivating perceptions that support that sense of belonging, being here together. And for anybody who's new for the Tuesday night group, just letting folks know that I do record on Tuesday evenings. That's why I spotlight myself. And what that means is your video will never show up in the recording, but audio from any of us will show up. Oh, I see. Susan, I don't, oh, I know. Thanks for putting that in the chat. So nobody heard what I was saying.
I could hear you.
Oh, well, good.
Mhm.
But in any case, hopefully you can hear me now. Thumbs up if the sound is good. Great. Yeah, I was just encouraging people, if you didn't hear, that just to take the first few minutes and connect with the community. Appreciate being able to be here together. And we'll settle into our silent meditation time. I'll give some instructions at the beginning. It's an act of courage to feel what we're feeling here, starting with what's most obvious, feeling the sensations of the sitting body, the breathing body. Noticing the content of the thinking mind, imagining mind, just as it is. We have these rivers, river of sensation being known, and the river of thinking, thoughts, and other mental images being known. And we have this river of feeling in our heart, this river of feelings being known. So sensing all that's in motion, all that is unfolding right here. We don't have to go anywhere. It's right here, here in the here and now, as movement, as an unfolding process. And that, of course, includes any reactivity or resistance we might notice. That's part of what's moving, part of what's unfolding as a natural process. Everything following the lawfulness of causes and conditions, what's in motion. in the sense of it can't be otherwise. What's unfolding as thought, what's unfolding as sensation, what's unfolding as feeling tone in the heart, the affective quality of pleasantness, unpleasantness, and neutrality. This is what we mean by Vedana or feeling tone in a Buddhist context. Every moment, all moments have this ephemeral or this changing feeling tone. And it keeps moving. The how it feels, how it is, keeps changing, keeps moving, unfolding. So as we tune into everything that's moving, then we're curious about, can this movement, whatever it is that's moving, unfolding, can it be trusted? In other words, can we relax and allow, let things be? And in particular, the river of feeling here could start by using the heart center to initially attune to the feeling tone that's unfolding. So we're allowing the sensitive heart to be touched and touched and touched and touched by this river of feeling. And maybe it's safe to be this sensitive, this vulnerable to the feelings that are unfolding. Even the feeling, what it feels like if it seems that nothing's happening, well, there's a feeling there too. And there's a feeling there if we're bored. And there's a feeling there if we're overwhelmed or excited or peaceful. There's always a feeling being felt here and now in the heart. So let's allow this maybe to be kind of meditative anchor, this sensitivity to the river of feeling. And if you get lost in thought, which of course we will in moments, then we notice that and we begin again by just being curious. Well, what's the feeling here? What's the underlying feeling that's unfolding, being known here and now by the sensitive heart? And we don't have to define it or explain to ourselves what the feeling is. That question, what's the feeling now, is just an invitation to feel what's here being felt. And to relax and let things unfold. So let's continue now in silence. And again, for the last couple minutes, curious, what's the underlying feeling here? And feel the underlying feeling as a moving river of feeling right here in the heart of things. Letting this movement be what it is, not resisting, not defining. Neither for or against anything. Just letting the movement of body, heart, mind move. Everything, maybe everything can belong as something that comes and goes. So if something beautiful arises, we know that it's something that comes and goes. If something really difficult arises, it is also something that comes and goes lawfully in its own way. Can this be okay? What's unfolding here? What's moving here? Can this be okay? That it feels like this? Excuse me. So take a moment and move your body as you need to, so you're comfortable. Stretch a little if you want. Really nice to see everybody tonight. Thanks so much for showing up. Get to have our Tuesday Dharma group. Some of you were here last week and know that I started a theme of the Buddha's teachings on the three characteristics. And it's helpful, I'll just review a little bit in case you weren't there last week, but it's helpful to remember that, we're capable of connecting with the present moment on different levels. So the more obvious level, the level we mostly are connecting with, is we're connecting with the meaning that we've constructed about what we think is going on in the moment. So we're connecting with our cognitive understanding, right? Our interpretation, our narrative. And this is, we often, just in our more superficial navigation of our lives, we just take this to be the whole truth, just checking in with my narration or checking in with the story I'm telling myself, the meaning the conceptualizing mind is giving to the experience. Like, for example, now, if I check in on that level, I would understand, oh yeah, I'm giving a talk to people on Zoom. I'm sitting on this chair that I often sit at in this big room at our house. Oh yeah, this is what's going on for me. So that's the conceptual level, and that's part of our reality. And, when we're wise, we realize that it's the conceptual level. And when we're being unwise, we're still aware of that conceptual level, but we don't realize it's a conceptual level. We think it's like the entirety of the truth of the moment. And then, so everyone just sort of have a sense of this cognitive or conceptual sense of who and what's going on, who you are and what's going on here. And we can notice that as thought, mental images, maybe even some emotional tone. And we can start to notice, even on that mental level, the specific quality or nature of thought being known, and mental images being known, and emotions being felt. So not the particular thought, but that it is a thought. Not the particular emotion, but just that movement that is an emotion. Right? In the same way we can, instead of the idea of I have this body and it's sitting in this chair that I often sit in, we can, the actual experience of the body isn't that concept or that mental image I have of me sitting in this chair. The actual experience in terms of specifics and physical sensations is, that particular pressure that I feel where my forearm is resting on, the part of the chair that it's resting on, or the sits bones pressing down, or the hands touching, or the air against the skin, the coolness, in my case, of the air against the skin. Right, so there's this level of our reality that we can definitely tune into, and we do periodically, right? We notice the specific characteristics of touch, of sight, of sound, of taste and smell, and even the specific characteristics of thought. So not the content of a thought, but the actual dynamic of that little blip of mental energy that we call a thought. Like, what is a thought independent of the content? What is a mental image independent of our interpretation of the mental image? It's not much of anything. Thinking and most mental activities are pretty insubstantial. Even, part of the reason we did this, I gave these instructions tonight to tune into the river of feeling, is to start cultivating a different relationship to feeling, because we tend to solidify the idea, like if I'm having an unpleasant feeling, we very quickly solidify the unpleasantness into an idea. Oh yeah, this is really unpleasant and I don't like it and I want it to go away. What can I do to make it go away? But the actual, when we start to notice feeling as a movement, that actual mental and energetic movement of unpleasantness and the movement of not liking the unpleasantness, it's much more ephemeral, much more insubstantial than we often, the way we often relate to the experience of unpleasantness or the experience of pleasantness. We make it into something more than what it actually is. We get this, when we're sitting, and if we sit long enough, it's going to get unpleasant, painful even. And if we're in the flow of sensation, the painful body is often surprisingly workable. But as soon as the attention is more identified with the thought, I'm experiencing a lot of pain in my body and there's still 30 minutes left to the sit. How am I going to make it? I don't want people to see me moving because I'm a Buddhist meditation teacher and that won't look cool. And so that is insufferable. I mean, that's really hard to be at that level where there's the physical sensation and the mental interpretation, the story, right, can be very oppressive, very hard to be with, very hard to handle, because we're sort of almost like exponential function. We're adding unpleasantness on top of unpleasantness on top of unpleasantness by the thinking about the physical pain. Right? There is some physical pain, the back hurts or whatever it might be. But it's hard to stay at that level of specific characteristics and noticing how they keep moving. So whatever the throbbing is in the back, it's a flow, it's a river. It isn't, it's the concept that makes it seem so solid, like a big edifice, my aching back. Just comes to life as something really that's a problem. But when we're on the level of specific characteristics, we find we can work with the pleasant, the unpleasant, whether it's emotion or sensation or sound or smell or temperature or whatever it might be. And then there's an even deeper level, and this is the level that in Buddhism we call the three characteristics, or the universal characteristic of all things, whether it's mental or physical, that it's changing, anicca, that it's not capable of satisfying, so it's unsatisfactory, which means dukkha. That's that Pali word, dukkha. It means that things are unable to satisfy the sense of a me, unable to give me the ground, the safety I want from my experience. Experiences can't do that. And when we see that, we see the changing nature, the unsatisfactory nature, and the impersonal nature. And it's just sort of a shift from gross to subtle. So the gross level, the obvious level, is the conceptual overlay. And that's mostly what we're attending to. Then more subtle than that is this level of specific characteristics of sound and smell and taste and touches and sights and mental activities, right? Seeing those things in a more sort of immediate, like when they touch, when a sight, a visual form touches the sensitivity of the eye, what's that before the conceptual overlay? So I'm looking at my computer screen now, right? But before I know it's my computer screen, it's just a certain degree of light and shape and form. But it's really hard, like especially for most of us, visual experience, it's really hard to stay at the raw immediacy of visual experience, especially when we're looking at familiar objects. We go, the attention very naturally wants to go right to the perception, right, how we recognize it, with a concept. Oh, that I'm looking at the Zoom screen here. But what it really is just shape, color, lightness, brightness versus dimness. It's just those elemental aspects of visual experience. Same with the auditory, it's just pitch and tone and how loud or how soft. But we turn sound into our conceptual interpretation. If we're hearing language or hearing the sound of a car, it's like that idea that that's a car I'm hearing sort of dominates our perception. It's hard just to stay with the sound as sound. It's a little bit easier when we train ourselves to be with sensation without the interpretation of the sensation dominating the perception. Just to be with like I'm a little cool right now, a little cold. And so I can tune in to that specific characteristic of cool cool. And I can even notice that it isn't a thing like I'm cool, I'm a little cold, right? It's a movement of sensation, a movement of a felt experience. And it isn't static, I'm cold. Like the concept creates the appearance of solidity. That's why we tend to be, all of us, ignorant, right? We tend to, see permanence in things that are actually a river, a changing process. So I'm going to be talking more, it's subtle territory in our practice, but it's always here and now, like the three characteristics, the changing nature, the unsatisfactory nature, and the impersonal nature. This has always been the underlying nature of things, truth of things. But we're just rarely have the supporting causes for that stability of present moment awareness to be sensing that subtle nature of what's always here and now. So we train ourselves, right? Like we create conditions where our mind isn't being drawn out into our interpretation, into the conceptual overlay, where we can really learn to rest in this more specific level of experience, sensations, smells, tastes, touches, thoughts are just thoughts, right? The felt sense in the heart is just that, being known. And then the deeper truth of the three characteristics just naturally dawns, wisdom naturally senses, oh, it's all in motion. It's kind of like you're sitting there next to a babbling brook, in a beautiful setting, and there's big trees and nice plants and some creatures doing their thing, and you're just enjoying yourself. But then maybe the mind relaxes a little bit and it moves from this idea, boy, this is a nice spot, right? The conceptual overlay. I'm so glad I decided to take a walk today. I should do this walk more often. This is really great. And what a nice rock to be leaning against, I wonder if I should put my feet in the water. That might feel good, right? So we tend, even though we're really enjoying it and we're sort of present, right? But the mind and what the mind is attending to is very much in that conceptual bubble. It's still hearing the sound of the babbling brook, and it's still seeing, and it's smelling the smell of the forest, but the perception is mostly dominated by the thoughts it's having about those elemental specific characteristics. But we could start to get interested in something like the flickering of the light through the leaves, just the raw visual experience of it, not my interpretation. Because when the mind gets interested in things as they are, then it starts to recognize how the conceptual overlay gets in the way. Right? And I always see this like some of you remember the Buddha's instructions in the mindfulness of breathing sutta or discourse, the Anapanasati. And he gives instruction like to start to notice joy. And for me, that transition from being really present with the body, and then, that's the fourth instruction. The fifth instruction is breathing in, experiencing joy. Breathing out, train yourself to experience joy. And for me, what's been helpful to make that transition is just noticing whatever, like if I'm with the body, noticing that the body is happening on its own. Like that, it's like the babbling brook, whether we're tuning into the sound of the babbling brook or we're tuning into the flickering visual experience of water and the light reflecting on the water, right? So if we're sort of relaxing away or below the idea, oh yeah, I'm seeing the little babbling brook, to just the visual dance of visual information, touching the sensitive eyes. And that is delightful because of the nature of that experience of seeing the flickering of light on the water surface or hearing the flickering of sound, all the infinite little sounds, but not fixing on any particular sound, but just relaxing and letting the changing nature of the sound or the changing nature of the visual experience be what it is. Or maybe I did put my feet in the water and then the changing nature of those physical sensations as the current of the water touches the skin. If we relax, then we begin to feel the presence of that joy of connecting with the deeper truth of the moment, the changing nature, the unsatisfactory nature, the impersonal nature. It has the taste of liberation because the mind is realizing that it doesn't have to be dependent on its conceptual overlay. In a way, we can sum up our problem as human beings as we have this amazing tool, like the thinking mind is an amazing tool. It allows us to communicate. It allows us to solve problems by abstracting them. Like we have a problem with one of the locks at our retreat center in Wisconsin. Some of you know, have been there. And it's just the latch isn't working. And I, here, 83 miles away from our retreat center, I can visualize the door. I can visualize the latch on the door. I can imagine all kinds of things that have gone wrong. Maybe bugs crawled in there and now it's getting jammed up, or maybe there's a spring in there that's broken. I mean, I've done all this, right? As I'm either in my own mind or in conversation with other people, because we've got to figure out how to fix that door. And so it's useful to have this ability to conceptualize and use that abstraction, right? I'm not seeing the door, I'm not touching the door, I'm not smelling it or tasting it, or, I'm just in my thought about it, my mental imagining about it. But if we get dependent on that, and if we begin to mistakenly think that conceptual overlay is the truth, then we start to suffer, right? Because that dependence, and then it's sort of this weird thing starts to arise for us, which is reality seems to start to threaten what we think is reality, right? Because it keeps creeping in. It's like we have an idea of who I am or what's going on in this moment or what I should be doing now. But there's this very wild thing we call reality happening right here. And it keeps interrupting our illusion, our delusion, right? So we have to keep patching up our conceptual overlay to make it make sense for ourselves. And there's a little war going on between the way it is, dharma, that word we use, the way it is, and the way we think it is. There's a very famous sutta in the Udana. That's a collection of the suttas, discourses, and I love the translation of that word, Udana. It means inspired utterances. So it's a collection, and usually the suttas are pretty short in that particular collection. And this one is translated, the title is translated as Surveying the World. Surveying the World. And the line that I think is so interesting gets translated one way as, for in whatever way one conceives, the fact is ever other than that. And then another way that same line gets translated, by whatever means it supposes anything, it becomes otherwise than that. So in other words, however we conceptualize, however we think this is, I am, the moment is, that thought isn't it. That thought is just a thought. So as long as we're confused by our thoughts, as long as we're identified, attached, taking them to be more than what they are, we keep missing the truth of the moment. And when we miss the truth of the moment, that means all of our actions, the intentions that we have, are going to be based on delusion, not aligned with the way it is. So it's always, that's why the word dukkha itself means like there's an axle or a wheel that's out of true. So the cart just doesn't work very well, right? So our life just doesn't work very well because our understanding isn't in alignment with the way it is. It's in alignment with the way we think it is. And when we think that it's this way, that this experience is happening to me, then greed, hatred, and delusion is just going to naturally follow. Because that's what follows when we take experience and we do this conceptual overlay in terms of a me having an experience that I either like or don't like or I don't care about because it's neutral. And that's sort of the basic conceptual overlay. Oh, I like this experience, I want to hold on to it. Or it's neutral, or I don't really care about it. Or it's painful and I want to get rid of it. And all three of those involve this conflictual relationships, this disconnect with the present moment. I was sort of looking at the Wikipedia about confirmation bias. I'm sure many of you have heard that term. It gets taught in, introduction to psychology classes or courses. Confirmation bias, right? Where how we relate to the present moment is going to be, whether we know it or not, we're going to be trying to confirm the bias or the idea that we already have. That's what I meant about, like, we're always patching things up to make things seem like they're fitting what we expect, what we think. So if they do experiments, where they'll show people photograph after photograph, you just get to see it for a few seconds and then the next one comes and you just say what you're seeing. And they'll show you an airplane, they'll show you a bus, and then they'll show you a bridge, and then they'll show you a tree, and you just say tree and bridge. But as you're doing this, they start showing you a photograph that's maybe half of a jet airplane, or half of a tree, and what happens is, because the sequence is unfolding, relatively quickly, the mind, the perceptual process, just sees the whole, sees what it expects to see. It starts to see a little bit of the shape of a tree, though the trunk is missing, but it just immediately thinks, no, it's a tree. And the cue ahead of before this goes is like, tell us what you're seeing and let us know if there's any problem with the image you're seeing. But the mind just fills in, because we're going to confirm what we expect to see. We're going to hear what we expect to hear. We're going to, even in terms of our body, like I had an interesting thing happen. I was on a 2-month retreat this summer, and I started feeling like I had a lot of indigestion, GERD, that heartburn, which I don't have it a lot, but I have experienced it at times in my life. So I knew, what that is like. And I started feeling this thing, kind of felt like it was right there behind my breastbone. And, oh, okay, GERD. It was a little strange because, I'd been eating really well and couldn't understand why I would be having heartburn. But I was just sort of, it was evening time, and I was just sort of paying attention to it and getting a little frantic, like, like, that's weird. And I think it was like the second or third night where I was having this GERD, just in the evening, after a day of just practicing, because I was on retreat. And then, like the third night or whatever night it was, of just having the same experience, I noticed, just like I got a little bit more interested. Instead of the confirmation bias, oh, that's just GERD, that's just that heartburn, and I got to pay attention to how much I'm eating and what I'm eating and the combination of foods and, this and that. But then I, for some reason, I got a little bit more interested, and I noticed, well, that's interesting. It's a little to the right of the esophagus, because GERD is when you get a little of that stomach bile up into the esophagus, and it burns the skin of the surface of the esophagus, and it, that's that feeling of heartburn. And I thought, well, that's a little weird, that it would be a little bit to the right of it. And then, of course, the mind started to get more interested, and it realized, oh, it's not GERD at all. It was something completely different. And all of a sudden there was just like something just opened up. It was just like tremendous pain for about 3 weeks. And then it slowly dissipated, and by 2 months it was completely gone. I have no idea what it was, but it wasn't GERD. But for a while the mind kept like massaging it back into the idea. No, this is GERD. And I was like frustrated with the GERD all well into the night. Even when I went to bed, like, oh, that's a pain. And when you have GERD, you got to sort of prop yourself up because you don't want more of the stomach bile to come up into the esophagus. So I changed how I was sleeping. I was doing all this stuff as if I had GERD, which I didn't. I was just, that confirmation bias was just playing itself out. Because we get stuck on the conceptual overlay, and it's not so easy. We just believe it. There's this, when I was reading about that, though, in Wikipedia, they quoted this guy who was the editor and publisher of Skeptic magazine. He's sort of a scientist, somebody who studies the history of science and likes to debunk like pseudoscience. And I think that's partly what the Skeptic magazine does. But anyway, this person has this great line that he wrote: "Smart people believe weird things because of their skill at defending beliefs they arrived at for not smart reasons," right? Because when you're smart, you're really good at defending your wrong ideas about what's going on. I mean, this is like a perfect explanation for what's going on. I mean, we have really smart people defending stupid ideas, doing stupid stuff. We have really smart people doing stupid stuff that's going to cause everyone suffering. So it's not so easy to unhook because, like, even our economy, it's being run by smart people who believe weird things like having more is going to make us happy, for example, and the economy depends on us consuming. So we have all these weird ideas, but they're being defended by really smart people, who know how to grab our attention and make us want things. And there we have the internet, that is mostly about smart people making us want things, making us want to stay on the internet, and consume more information and basically become puppets of people who know how to grab our attention and make us want this and hate that and, push us around in that way. The same thing we do within our own mind, except now it's happening, through these digital information systems. Some of you remember, I know Gail, who's here tonight, knows Shinzen Young very well, and he was one of our important early teachers in Minnesota. The Twin Cities Vipassana Collective brought him in for many years, and he was teaching several retreats a year for a while. And but Shinzen had this great line. He would say, pretty regularly, "Subtle is significant." And it's really important, and it's really about this movement from the conceptual to the specific to the universal. And the 3 levels are always here, and we don't need to demonize the conceptual, because we can use the conceptual to get interested in the specific and the universal, or basically to get interested in what's here but isn't being acknowledged, isn't being seen, isn't being understood. Right? That's, we use that word dharma in different ways, dhamma or dharma in different ways. Like it can mean the way it is, but it also means the teachings of the Buddha, which are just a bunch of stories and concepts. Right? We're right now at the level of concept. But hopefully the concepts, if they're of any real value, the Buddha's teachings, the stories, the maps of our heart and mind, that we're learning from the Buddha and from our elders, hopefully they're supportive of being interested in the specific characteristics of the present moment and the underlying truth of these specific characteristics, that they're being known, that they're ephemeral, insubstantial, changing processes, that are unsatisfying, not capable of satisfying that sense of I, me, or mine. And that, in fact, that whole unfolding process of body and mind is not personal in the way, it doesn't refer back to a self in the way that my concepts, my story presumes that it refers back to an I, me, or mine. And that all, like we need the concept to support our interest, to inspire our interest, so that we're willing to do our morning sit and pay attention as best we can throughout the day about like, oh yeah, being cold feels like this. Being angry feels like this. Being attracted feels like this, right? To see the sense, the elemental, without immediately being lost in the story about the attraction or about the aversion. In the Dhammapada, wisdom arises from spiritual practice. Without practice, wisdom decays. Knowing this two-way path for gain and loss, conduct yourself so that wisdom grows. And it's really about this interest. So even though we might have an idea, and this is like important for people who have studied a lot of the Buddhist teachings, we can get content with a lot of confidence on this conceptual level of the teachings. Because even on that level, on that intellectual or conceptual level, the teachings are very powerful, right? And very useful, just on that philosophical, psychological level of ideas. But real freedom depends on us using the teachings in a particular way to direct the attention to the specific, to what's moving, like we did tonight, like seeing that the experience of what we call the body, the concept of the body, what it really is a movement of sensation. And when we are aware of hearing, it's really a movement of sound energy. And sight, seeing, is really a movement of visual information. And even thinking, all of the meaning we're giving to things, that's just a river of thought. Again, going back to the Anapanasati Sutta, when the Buddha is talking, giving instructions, when we're in that really beautiful place of contentment and ease, sukha, right? And we're breathing in, aware of that contentedness, breathing out, aware of that contentedness. It's only then that the Buddha says, be aware of mental activity. Because we're kind of in that peaceful, contented place, now we're capable of looking at mental activity without getting lost in the content of the thoughts and the mental images. And we can just see it in a more dispassionate way. It's just thinking. It's just thoughts coming and going, feelings coming and going, mental activity coming and going. And then we discover something that's so important to discover. That's how the mind, the thinking mind, becomes more quiet. Not by you or me trying to quiet the thinking mind, but by observing the thinking mind, letting thinking be thinking without being attached. So we need that chilled out contentment, that sense of inner ease, the ease of well-being, so we can observe the thinking mind thinking and the feeling heart feeling without being pushed around by it, being confused by it. So it's observing mental activity without being confused or making it more than what it is. Because we already feel pretty content, so then I'm able to, because otherwise we're using the thinking mind to feel good. Right? This is one of the things we discover when we're on a longer retreat. It's like, oh, that thinking mind is in the service of feeling good and avoiding feeling bad. And then when we're neurotic, it kind of does the opposite, right? You're bad and you should be punished. So we're going to keep bringing to mind, like Sylvia Boorstein says, we got to learn to stop scaring ourselves. Because when the mind is in sort of a downward cycle, the thinking mind just keeps thinking about things that are painful. And even then, it's sort of in the service of feeling good. It just feels like I got to really go to hell before I deserve to feel good. Oh, I got to deal with all these problems, these things that scare me, before I'm going to be free of them. I mean, it doesn't really make sense. But there we go. It's sort of shocking in our lives to realize that, the Buddha's teachings and the practices he's offering us, they're not going to fix the world. And they're not going to fix our relationship or our families. And they're not, in a lot of ways, they're not even, the practice isn't even going to fix our personality or make it different. The practices that we get from the Buddha are really about transforming how we relate to the world, how we relate to the relationships that we have, as messy as they are, how we relate to our families, how we relate to our personality. We can relate to them as natural phenomena that are coming and going, anicca, not worthy of grasping because they're not going to satisfy that sense of an I, me, or mine, and that they're impersonal. So that's the anicca, dukkha, anatta. That's how the Buddha talks about the underlying universal nature of our experience. And that's what the practice delivers. And that's what's liberating. It's this world and this personality and this relationship I have with my spouse and this relationship I have with the board of directors and the students and the friends and family, all the important relationships in my life. It's understanding that all of this, all experience, all conditioned experience without any exceptions is anicca, dukkha, anatta. And it's the not knowing of that is the cause of suffering. And it's the deep understanding of that is what is so liberating. And so this we can check out for ourselves, but we have to be inspired to do. It isn't enough to hear it. Nobody can do this for us. We actually have to look. And of course there will be ripple effects in our families, in our personalities, in our communities, in the world, the larger world, when we do this work. And it will, there will be some effect when somebody is not modeling, not acting out greed, hatred, and delusion. Well, that makes a difference in a family or in a world or in our individual lives. But there's a lot of ignorance already in motion, and it doesn't change everything. But it allows us to be right in the middle of the mess, right in the middle of our relationships, right in the middle of our personality, without suffering and without being confused by it. So then there's really the possibility of responding skillfully, not in ways that perpetuate it. I'm going to read something from Andy Olensky. He's talking about this wonderful sutta. I put it in the chat here. As you know, as many of you know at least, I usually have several resources for people who want to do a little studying and other things that might be useful for community members in this document. So the link is there in the chat, including this article that Andy Olensky, a wonderful Buddhist scholar and teacher, wrote on this particular discourse the Buddha gave on the 4 distortions or 4 perversions, right? And here's something Andy wrote, just his own comments. Fundamental to the Buddhist notion of ignorance or delusion, it is not that we are inherently flawed in our nature. It is just that we make some serious errors on many levels as we attempt to make sense of the world around us. Right? We're not seeing, feeling, sensing the whole picture. And he writes, as we come to recognize through meditation practice some of the ways we misconstrue things about our experience, we become more able to correct for these errors and gain greater clarity. This is the Buddhist view of mental disease and mental health. Delusion is a mental illness that causes all sorts of suffering. Mental health can be restored by correcting the flaws in how the mind operates. Fortunately, Buddhas arise to make things bright. Right? That's a quote from the tradition, and illustrates in detail how this recovery of our natural health can be accomplished. And so this way is, when we're on our conceptual level, we tend to see permanence in what is actually impermanent. We tend to see pleasure in what is not capable of satisfying ourselves. We tend to see self in what is actually an impersonal process. And we tend to see lovely in what is actually not lovely. It doesn't mean it's ugly, but it's not inherently lovely. And so you can just do it for yourself, like when you see a beautiful sunset, or I heard on the radio today that about the time we end our program, in 15 minutes or so, it will be, if you can look to the north and you don't have too much light outside, you might see some good northern lights tonight. I guess there's a big solar storm that's peaking tonight and tomorrow, and early evening is evidently a good time to see it. Right, so we see the northern lights, or we see a beautiful sunset, or you notice a nice bouquet of flowers you have at home, or whatever it might be. And it'd be really useful to see how, there's that mental construct. Oh, this is lovely. I like this. It's pleasant for me to see this. And then it's just like shifting into the level of specific characteristics, right? There's some color, there's some light, brightness, dimness, right? It's just what it is visually. Northern lights are just what they are. It's the idea, that that's rare, that very few people on the planet get to see them. Most of us live in cities and there's so much light we can't. Oh, someone put a beautiful picture in to the chat. That's great. Thank you for that. Yeah. And it's alive with change too. If you ever get to see the northern lights, we tend to see it as static, but they're moving, they're evolving, they're morphing. Right? It's a play of energy, just like our bodies, just like sound, just like everything. So we can kind of work with these 4 distortions that the Buddha says, where we start to catch how I just impute or project permanence in what's actually changing, how I project self in what is actually a natural process unfolding, where I imagine that lunch is going to be satisfying in some kind of substantial way when it's not. It's just like a little pleasure, it peaks, and then even before the lunch is done, the pleasure is already fading. And the last few bites might not actually be pleasant. We may be well into the neutral or even slightly unpleasant because we ate too much or whatever. We've lost our interest in it, but we don't want to leave part of the sandwich, But we don't notice that. We just think that lunch is more than what it is. Or maybe you're going to go watch some entertainment after this program is over, and we can think, oh, that's like, I'm going to be satisfied. But it will be what it is, there'll be some pleasure, but that pleasure, assuming you have a good thing to watch, that pleasure is sort of sand through the fingers. It's pretty ephemeral. So I'd really work with this, and you can even print a copy of Andy's thing if you want, and study that, because he has the important part of the sutta there that's easy to read. It's pretty straightforward, and then his comments are there as well. And just look for these distortions, because that's really a very pragmatic way to get to know the universal characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta, is by seeing the tendency of the conceptual overlay to make permanence, to make the experience of satisfaction, to construct loveliness, to construct the sense of a I, me, or mine, self. But I'll leave it here, so we have about 10 minutes. It's always really helpful to hear from other people, your own reflections on what I've said tonight, or any questions that emerge from hearing the talk, or just from your practice generally. Always good to say your first name if you don't mind, and share your pronouns if you want, if that's helpful for the group. Anybody can begin. Just go ahead and unmute yourself. What comes to mind? Any places in your life where you tend to catch yourself with these distortions, making something... Yeah, go ahead, Paul. Or is this Edith?
No, this is Paul today. Yeah, what I'm thinking of is just how much distortion there is in our view of the world. Really, that I look at the government systems and some of the other things that are going on, and it's like, how do you maintain any sort of sense of balance in that? You can see that people have wrong ideas, and they're propagating them really, in different ways. And then how do you, in some ways, how do you have hope?
Yeah.
There's a way to change.
Well, we are a tangle within a tangle, right? That's what the Buddha says about this. And either it will make us bitter, or it will make us nihilistic, or it can tenderize the heart in the direction of compassion. And so when we let it lead us to wisdom and compassion, then we see, like you described, Paul, we see how suffering leads just to more suffering, ignorance leads to more suffering, and we're motivated not to add any more. Because that sort of challenges us, how am I doing the same thing? Maybe in not as big of a way, but how am I getting confused by permanence in the same way? Like, for example, in the example you gave, we might make the ignorant forces in ourselves and in our world more permanent than what they are, more substantial than they are, right? More personal than they are. Like, you might bring to mind a politician that for you exemplifies someone who is misusing their power, ignorant, planting seeds for a lot of suffering. And we may personalize that person. Like, they're doing it, they're evil, instead of seeing the natural process of who and what they are. They are the unavoidable continuation of all the supporting causes that make that person that person. Can't be otherwise. We can't find that person there. We have the mental image of them, we know their name, we know where they are, but there's no person there. It's a natural process. There's no center to that ignorance or that evilness or whatever we might think. And that changes, because hate and fear, it needs a target. But when we realize it's just what it is, it's like it's hard to hate a terrible storm that's doing damage to your house, because there's nobody to hate. There's no center. This is the evilness of that storm. I mean, we might personify it, we try to, but it doesn't lend itself, weather doesn't lend itself to personification. Any other thoughts, Paul, before we move on? Yeah, thanks for sharing with us. Who'd like to go next? Other reflections for the group? Any examples of confirmation bias where you just saw yourself making stuff up and believing it, and only to find that it ain't that way? This is where a good practitioner develops a deep sense of humor, just catching over and over again how delusion works, Wynn, my partner, and I, like when we do stupid stuff with each other, draw conclusions that are based on, you know, our own delusion, and then we get called on it or somehow figure it out ourselves. And it's just so amazing, it's like this big problem because this is what my spouse did, or this is, whatever. And then we realize it was just somehow the mind made something up that's just not grounded in reality. But it seems so real until the rug gets pulled out. Seeing permanence in what is impermanent, seeing satisfaction in what is ultimately unsatisfying, not capable of satisfying, seeing self in what is actually an impersonal process, just nature, natural unfolding, and seeing lovely in what is actually neither lovely nor ugly, it's just what it is. I mean, this is the training we can actually do, right? We can actually get interested in this. I'll just end with this sweet little passage from the suttas. Wherever I go, I am unafraid. Wherever I sleep, I am unalarmed. The nights and days do not burn me. I see nothing in this world that is to be lost. Therefore my heart dwells in goodness and kindness to all beings until I fall asleep. I think we should read that to ourselves every night before, when we get our PJs on and we're in bed. We should read that. Wherever I go, I am unafraid. Wherever I sleep, I am unalarmed. The nights and days do not burn me. I see nothing in this world that is to be lost. Right? Because when we're not attached, when we're not clinging, there's nothing to be lost. Right? Because we're living with the truth of change. We've integrated it, we're aligned with it. Therefore my heart dwells in goodness and kindness to all beings until I fall asleep. So may that be so. And thanks everyone for coming tonight. And if you're interested in how you relate to technology, Shelley Graff, the guiding teacher, one of the guiding teachers, and Gabe Keller-Flores, one of our longtime teachers, will be doing a media workshop this Saturday, 9:30 to 4, relating skillfully to technology. And then Sunday, I'm starting a 1-week media fast for the community, and I have a lot of information. Just look for the calendar invite. For Sunday, it starts at 4:30 this Sunday, and then we'll meet the following Sunday, 1 to 3, and just check in with each other how it goes, having this 1 week. And each person will decide how you're going to, reduce your addiction to media. So it'll be different for each person, depending on your duties and responsibilities. What might you get away with, and what might be interested in terms of looking at how our addiction to these digital devices has really grown. And we don't really notice until we purposefully put them aside for a period of time. So join me for that on Sunday if you're interested. More information is on the calendar, or if you don't find the information, just reach out to me and I'll give you the information. Take care, everybody. Nice to be with you tonight.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Mark.